Hello and welcome to Fireworks in the Real World. This is episode 7, and this week we're going to look at carry on looking at some of the design tools that we started looking at last week. In particular, the properties of some simple vector objects. Well, in fact, a lot of these properties apply to vector, bitmap, and symbol items. So we looked at the fill properties, the line work properties, and now we're down to this little panel over here, and the last one on the right there. So this panel here is it's all the settings to do with layer effects and filters. So the first thing you can do, so we've got a rectangle. The first one is the opacity of that item, and as I say, that works on vectors and bitmap and anything you've converted into symbols. The next one is the layer effect. Now this is never fully understood how these actually work. I'm sure somebody somewhere does, but I find that an advantage. I've never really known what the difference between these vivid light and hard light, apart from what I know if I try them, sometimes they look great and sometimes they don't. So I find it quite useful to actually go through a lot of these and just experiment, and you can get some wonderful effects across layers by using them. I do know, for example, though, however, things like overlay and screen are very good for, like, if you've got a black logo on a coloured background, they can be very handy for just bleeding out the background colour, so you just got the black. I know that multiply does a similar effect, and actually kind of multiplies mathematically whatever colours you've got with the background colour. So again, that can black logos on a coloured background, you can sort of multiply it and just see the black logo. So little things like that are quite useful. Dodging is quite fun and can produce some kind of very vivid lighting effects. And luminosity is nice for overlaying fonts on photography, that kind of thing. So I guess I do know a few of these quite well. XOR is another quite useful one, actually. That's kind of logic. Comes from a logic gates of keeping things exclusive. So if you have an object which is whatever colour you make it, and you use an XOR colour or a layer effect, whenever you put it over another object, it would always be visible. So if it was black, it would become white. So it's always exclusive, so it can always be seen. So I think there's actually more more layer effects in Fireworks than Photoshop at the moment. But yeah, they're very, very useful for experimenting with and for creating effects. So well worth having a run through and see what creative things you can come up with. Okay, so that's this top area. The lower area, now this is where we get into the live filters. Very powerful set of presets in here. From going down the menu, well, we can turn them all on and off in one go. Once we've got some in, you can actually add third-party plugins as well. But the basic set looks like that, together with the Photoshop live effects down the bottom, which are the same effects that you might be used to in Photoshop. But if we look at the kind of basic Fireworks ones first, so we've got adjustments. We can adjust for levels, which doesn't have any options. Just turn it on and off. We can simple controls for brightness and contrast, and we can choose in most of these effects whether we want to preview what's happening or not. We have colour fill. That's very useful for directly applying a colour change. Now, because that's an XOR, it's always going to be a different colour. Let's just turn that back to normal. So colour fill is very handy, and you can change the percentage of the fill. Now I'm not going to run through every single one. Lots of standard stuff in here you're probably used to from other packages. Colour curves, hue and saturation, I use that a lot. It's good for just sort of tweaking visually. Because this works on bitmaps and vector, I use it for live changes on photography, just to blend them with other objects on the screen. Very similar to the Photoshop filter. Now, these all being live, you can turn them on and off with the little tick boxes here. and you can change the order of them. So if I, for example, we have a whole set of bevel and embossing tools here. So if I choose a bevel, it's a particularly nasty one. Let's do something a bit more subtle. And then we add a drop shadow. Maybe not quite that far. We'd want on this little list which does scroll, we'd want the drop shadow to be applied afterwards. If we click and drag, we can actually make the change so it actually applies a drop shadow and then bevels it, which creates subtly different effects. But depending on the combination of effects you've applied, changing the order can have implications. So it's worth knowing you can actually drag and reorder them. Now, once you've got your set of effects, there's a couple of things you can do with what you've applied to any object. So, first thing I can do over here is a list of styles. Now, the styles are really handy because they create basically presets of what you've defined in your filter panel. So if I create a new style and call this drop shadow 1 maybe. Now I can choose in here, as well as naming it, I can choose the different properties of all the effects, because this isn't just the filters, this is also everything you've defined. So if you've got a particular kind of fill, a particular kind of line work, anything, all of this can be kept. And that's all shown in here. So fill type, fill color, stroke type, stroke color, the effects, and even the font sizes and styles. So we can save all those in a preset. So if I've now saved that, if I now click on my other shape, go to my list, I've now got that same effect. Although that looks drastically different. Why does that look drastically different? Let's draw another rectangle. Apply that to it. There you go. That was probably because I've got a difference there, that's why. Because I had a layer effect on. Quite a drastic one. It was showing it completely different. So I guess that's mathematically calculating the inverse, so that highlight has become a shadow, etc. Okay, so these are really, really, really useful, these styles, because another thing I can do, if I decide that that shadow is way too far away, I would go down to the drop shadow. I might move it, change it a little bit, make it a bit more subtle, and then I can redefine that style, which means it'll ripple across and update to everywhere else I've used it. So if I click that, we'll see that the one I defined previously has now been it's been reapplied, and that style drop shadow 1 has been redefined. Now that can be brilliant, because if you've got a style applied all over a multi-page document and you change your mind, say you think, oh, actually I think those shadows on all those bullet points are a little bit too heavy, you can do it in one go and change the style that you've applied across the page. So really, really powerful. So the next option along, well, let's go to the end. First of all, you can delete that particular style you've defined. You can also unlink the style that you've applied. So if you want that one to remain kind of exclusively different, you can kind of unlink it from the style itself. So now that hasn't got that particular style applied to it, but it does have these individual effects. So if you update that one and do something crazy on there and update the style, it won't affect. I've now redefined that style, so it's going to affect everything that's got drop shadow 1 on it, but this one now lives independently. So that can be useful. And so finally, the last button here, the middle button, is called the Clear Overrides button. And what this does is, well, basically, if you have lots of, let's copy and paste that, say lots of these, and you wanted to make a couple of individual changes, that's actually you're overriding the style here. You might turn that one off on there and that one. but this button will basically return them all back to their original state. Didn't do that. You have to click on it and then clear overrides. Oops. Then it will clear the override. So it doesn't do all of them in one go. It'll do them individually if you've changed and overridden the style. So that's the styles panel. Really useful. Use it all the time and find it very, very easy to change and affect styles. Now the last thing that I haven't shown you is, well, there's Photoshop Live Effects, which pretty much what I'm used to in Photoshop. So I usually use a combination of some of the Photoshop styles and the Fireworks files at the same time. Some of them they've got a few more options. The Fireworks styles tend to be a little bit simpler, more cut down in a few places. So depending on what I want to achieve, I might use the Photoshop Live Effects styles. And again, they also get defined. So if I redefine the style, there you go, they get rippled across as well if you've got the same style applied to different objects. Okay, the last little area of this panel is the Boolean operations for vector tools. Or one thing I should mention is when you save styles, if you bitmap objects, of course, they won't have these properties of fill and line work. It'll just be this panel here. So if you're dealing with bitmaps, not vectors, you can apply all the same filters, you can use styles, but of course you don't have any access to line work or fill for bitmaps. So that's the only difference between them. Otherwise you can use styles in the same way. So the Boolean operators, let's clear those crazy effects off. And you can delete these by just using the delete. I think you can multi-select. No, you can't. No, one at a time. Let's just tick them all off. Okay, so standard Boolean operations on vectors. If you select more than one object, you have an option to union them, i.e. join the paths. You have the option to, just make sure you select them both, to kind of subtract one from the other, or punch, which basically leaves the bit that's sticking out that isn't part of the two that overlap. You have an option to intersect, which is the opposite, so just the bit where they overlap. Or the last one is to crop, so pretty much the same. It just leaves that little bit again. Then the last option you have is to combine them, so that will actually now take away anything or the extraneous bits that you had originally and just leaving you with the bit that you're interested in from the Boolean operation. So pretty standard vector Boolean tools there for creating unique objects, but very useful to have in here. One other last little thing I just wanted to show. Let's turn all these effects back on again. Not the best example shape in the world to be working with, but that'll do. One other little thing you can do with your filters when you've applied a bunch of filters to something is if you've got the history panel open, you can actually select those filters and right click on them. Oh no, it's not right click, sorry, it's up here. It's save as command. So you can save your applied filters as a little command that'll appear up in the command menu. So I'm going to call that horrid or garish shadow 1. Now if I create another object at any point, this stays across, I think it stays across documents. So if you go to commands, and you'll see them appearing on the bottom of this list, you've always got access to garish shadow 1. Let me just test that. New document, draw a shape. Yeah, so it's always available between documents. Lovely. You always want to have that effect ready at hand, I should imagine. So that's what I'm going to show for this week, and more next week. Thank you very much.